design round table for us. Table is not very round, but I guess metaphor is great. So I think just to give you a sense, and I've sent some inputs to you already earlier, but round table is preceding our main event, which is the Kids to Play Summit. And there's a story around that also, which Summit is offshoot of a book, which I think some language. So this, I think for us, it was important that we have tighter, deeper discussions with a group of people who care about the work. Other piece which is coming from the book also is that we have spent enough time talking about why sport. In our belief, that ship has sailed, and now looking at how do we scale sport from the practitioner's view, how do we find more resources, mind share, and collaboration. As Somil mentioned, that we have had this goodwill for a very, very long time, but converting that into some material inputs from resourcing standpoint is important. And we thought, if some of you, given the lenses you have corporate leader, we have domain expert, we have philanthropist, we have social sector, what could perhaps be different? And we're calling it what next. We have come here to all of us know whether the story is at elite level or story at grassroots level, which we are about. So I think it was important for this format, and we thought we'll go around and I could direct you based on how the conversation goes, and we'll take about 4 to 5 minutes each. But you're free to stop and ask somebody else point if you want them to elaborate something you like. So there is no. But just I thought we could have a one round of opening inputs, and then maybe we'll have some buffer to also do some clarifications and follow-ons and whatever else. So I think we finish at 10, so keeping time, and I'll take that ownership for that. But I think it's important that we have a specific ask in the end that will at least give us the specificity required to do something material. And we would like to come back to you, hopefully, as Sports Village role is to be a catalyst here, and nudge and hopefully help work on those inputs which could have come from here, and keep you updated on that in the following events, roundtables as we go. So that's the whole broad agenda, and I did not cue anyone that I'm going to go first with somebody, but
before you ask us around, just what's in your mind, where you have reached now as you go look at the next 10 years, 20 years, or even the next 3 years, what would you like to see? Yeah, that will help us with the context as well.
Yeah, the context.
Okay, so let me just take a, we just want to jump in after that. So I think for us, the idea of scale is important.
Scale is
and and we discussed that the markets and government are about scale. And how does sport fit into this whole? There's a social sector in between, which is trying to bridge these two gaps. And sport somehow is speaking to all these three. So how do we now create a horizontal of sorts which touches across and still gets scale? And we have been fragmented, I mean, as a category, and we will hear about that. So it requires that whether it's body of evidence, which some of us have spoken of, and we have that now. But truly, I think the idea of getting scale, and we have this mission of 100 million kids comes from that, and the whole, whether Olympic gold medals or whatever else, is based on that large base of the pyramid, which we are focused on.
That's a great question. I think just to connect the dots to where we learned from, I think we've taken on this, I think, audacious goal, as we call it, of building 100 million kids to play. Just to put that in context, it's been 21 years of work. Today's our birthday, 21st birthday. And cumulatively, we've done 60 lakh plus kids have played. 6 million. So we're hoping it's going to be logarithmic after this. Right? So how does this become logarithmic as we are linear? It cannot be another 20 years and I get to 1.2 crore. So that's one. And if we start with that as the end goal, we need to figure out, are we not aligning well? Is our messaging wrong? If our product is so powerful, all of us are believers in sport, then why isn't there a bigger pull? Sometimes the messenger is wrong, sometimes the messaging is wrong, maybe some of the proposition, the way we articulate it might be incorrect or needs to change. So that's one whole direction. Other is, therefore, what is that one called experiment that we can prove? Is it with technology? Is it with digital stuff? Whatever else. So all degrees of freedom are open. But we're saying, can we, let's say at the end of this room's conversation and as we're doing it across, have a set of experiments that we think are worth working on, right? And if one of them works and proves it to be, just to add, not just scalable but also sustainable. I think the problem we're also seeing is that there is a spike and then it goes away. We need to find a way to make it sustain. So there might be a sponsor for a year, the next year the sponsor is not there. Then that's not a sustainable model. We can't keep having a new.
Yeah, that's
You have to find some way to keep that going because the kids are experiencing something and the next year is not there. That's actually worse for the kids.
correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you kind of shown them some heaven and then suddenly you're back. It's actually worse than not doing it at all. So sustainability is also one important concept here. So finding some, call it experiments, I'm using the word play. How can we play with this whole set of stakeholders, objectives, alignments, tools to come up with something saying, ye try kar. And we will catalyze it. And our belief is that if we find a model and we can prove it very quickly, support is there. The ground level support for getting more kids to play is there. I think we need to go out with something that we think is sustainable and scalable. That's the.
Just to, since you said so, can you also share what are a couple of things which have worked so far? You got so many kids to play. Maybe one couple of things which
You said
haven't-
60 lakhs, did you?
Cumulative, over 20 minutes. So add to this stuff. One thing that has worked has been school as center of gravity. And we can talk about why, but directionally it's the kids go there every day. There's a safe space, there's some safe time, there's facilitators. You don't have additional cost of getting kids to show up, which you might get in, let's say, a retail context of getting kids to show up. The other thing that has worked has been to align with education. I can give you some numbers. For the first, before we did EduSport, 2003 we started, 2008 we went to the EduSport model, knocking on school doors. For the first 5 years we used to run after school academies, go to apartment complexes and all that. We would have got around 10,000 kids to play on an average of 5 hours. So let's say 50,000 kid play hours as a unit of impact, right? When we work with schools, we are now getting 3 lakh kids to play throughout the year, so 35 weeks, 2 hours a week, so 3 lakh into 70. So certainly an order of magnitude different in the same 5 years. So aligning with education was the other thing that we found changing the scale. The last was brands, but it was episodic. We did Reliance Foundation in school, we did NBA basketball program, 3,000 schools, 30 lakh kids. Right?
1 year.
1 year.
Just one off.
Yeah, it happened 2-3 years. But how do you kind of keep it going? But it's like a 3-hour exposure, it's not throughout the year. So therefore the other question is how do you define this?
Yeah, no, I think the education piece but the grassroots sports has been neglected. We don't have a culture as a nation, and so I think what Sabil mentioned, the education and health piece so far was sport is just informing these areas, but not playing a central. When we look at education, we would think of numeracy and languages, the top 3 core that I would want to fund that even a CSR fund. That's where the learning levels are going to change enough. The sport hasn't been viewed as a central piece. Right? And all of us who played, we understand that something getting missed over. So that was one part, and we're seeing that changing, and I think the whole idea of scale can only happen when we are able to straddle this health education broader piece along with it. That's where we are at this point, but happy to hear views.
Please make this as a go round instead of doing
maybe
the
we'll start.
yeah,
Yeah,
please,
sure.
please, ऐसे कुछ पता नहीं है 5 मिनट आप बोलने के लिए बोलोगे तो शुरुआत करके
स्केल पे काम किया है और सस्टेनेबिलिटी भी है, so I think we're learning about.
I thought you will have the notes.
लाइफ ही बोलना है तो कभी भी बोलने के लिए तैयार. But taking on this question on quantity versus quality, which means you talked about I need scale, but you also talked about what connects beyond a certain point is, are you creating champions or things of that nature? So is that distinction very clear in your mind, and have you thought of that if you think of yourself as a funnel? Because to create a champion is that portion happens once a kid is 12, 15, gets pulled into a very formal, very different program, but you being the funnel to that in some sense, and making that whole process very verbalized, very formal. And if you had to do that, then thinking about at each level, how do you connect then? Like, are you holding tournaments? Are you creating leagues? Are people coming through those leagues so you can identify across this setup, these are my best players, best people, how many sports can you do this with? And I think if I connect that to the CSR bit, all like Thermax, yeah, public company, you have a CSR team, like a reporting to the board. So if we do things, we have to go back and report. I put money out here, these were the objectives, this is what it was supposed to achieve, this is what we actually achieved. And each year you have to go pitch whether this particular one should get funded again or not. Part of SVP, very similar, yeah. And the competition for funds is absolutely intense. And the kinds of, the quality of work that is going on, you say, I want to fund everyone. Yeah, and in that, sports will always take a lower one. To me, it feels like if you could reach out to business houses where there is connect to sports themselves. You know, those individuals themselves are passionate about sports, doing things. Connect will become perhaps easier. But then, what is it that you're offering? What does success look like? You have to be very, very clear on what success looks like. And I don't know how clear that is for you. Because if you just focus on scale, I want to give so many hours, that by itself may not be enough in my mind. Yeah, how do you define that success? I think
just one small question there. So when you say that there's intense competition, let's say for resources, if this one thing is solved for, what does success look like, and we are able to position it in the manner sponsor or funder views us, do you think then we are in a fair fight?
I think then if you can connect saying keeping kids at school becomes much easier with this, that one have to hammer that extremely hard, and then appealing to many places. Like I know I deal a lot with JSP. I know Naveen Jindal himself is like so passionate about sports. So if you can appeal to places where they are going to, at Thermax for example, every rupee that is there will first go to education. Everything else is secondary. But if you can connect to saying education means kids will stay in school longer if sports is attached,
Or
then
results are better. Or
academic results are better, all of those things, yeah, then you have a shot.
Yeah.
Otherwise, very, very.
Just building on that, I think especially in CSR, most companies, but some companies would have some defined pillars, like probably Thermax, you're saying education. So there should be some companies where sports related stuff is a pillar. They're conceptually fitting into their framework, it would be easier. And within that, then you have to have obviously the right program, right deliverables, etc. That is, I think, one way of breaking one barrier. But you have to then figure out which companies it is there. Second, I think which Ashish mentioned, and I totally agree, is you need to find. See, many of it is very discretionary. Finally, this putting money in this area, especially sports. I mean, there will be priorities and all this stuff. You need to find people who are in decision-making power who are passionate about sports.
That's fundamental.
And maybe you have to say, well, let me just add to that. I'm speaking from my own experience. Like in my previous company, we you're Olympic sponsor, top Olympic sponsor and everything. And main reason why we ended up doing activities in India, which was much more than any other country, was because the MD and the CMO believed in the power of sports. And as soon as they left, you will find close to zero funding going to sports because there's nobody to champion. Finally, there is a fight for resources. Let's say if it is CSR, there is a CSR team, and most likely the leader of the CSR team has his or her own thought process on where it should go, women empowerment, education. So these 2 points are also, I think.
I just want to, sorry, go
For
ahead.
one, and I'll shut up after that.
No, no, please.
For a while. The flip of that is, at least on CSRs, once you are in, getting kicked out is also, and you are delivering, getting kicked out is also not that easy. Most programs, most places, you want continuity. And at least most boards that I am aware of look for continuity. So the getting in will be the tough part. You can sustain it. If you once make your case, do all of that, then you can sustain. Maybe slightly different from that Bridgestone experience, but at least with Indian publicly listed companies, you will have an easier part once you're in to sustain. You will know next year I'm delivering this, I'll get an additional 5%, less 5%, more or less you can continue.
So I just want to double click on what you said and also you, Ashish. I think this finding leaders who are passionate about sports as a almost starting point.
It's an enabler.
Yeah, and also very often a disabler because then they leave the program. And that's my point about sustainability, that we're trying to find, however difficult it might be, what is the solution that I can find you to make it sustainable, irrespective of a Deepak Gulati being there or Ashish being there. Of course, we'll get started, early adopters, you all need early adopters and so on. But that early adopter should give us the runway to quickly make it sustainable. If the end of the early adopter it is not getting adopted, then there is a problem. Then it's goodwill working, then it's relationship working, but that's not sustainable.
Agree.
And that's why I want to kind of, yes, right now to do what we need to do, we will bang on your doors and say, can you help, can you support and so on. But sustainably,
Yeah.
what is that solution which, after you leave, what do I need to do to convince your team, who currently thinks of other very worthy causes,
Yeah.
right? Not that the cause is less worthy, but you are kind of fighting for it in money. Right? Is there a category level positioning we need to do of this whole kids to play piece versus other?
See, sports as a pillar is one thing. I would just that once it is there, it is sustainable. It's not dependent on people. And then, as Ashish said, some program you proven and delivered. I think these would be the base to sustain. And let
We
others.
found that to keep it sustainable, and you may enter through this topmost person, but to keep it sustainable is you have to use that time frame while they're there to send right down the line to the lowest person in the CSR team, so that goodwill carries forward whether somebody is there or not. That requires a lot of intense effort. It needs constant communication, constant success stories being mailed out, but it requires sustained effort. Actually, you need to have a client-wise team working. And that seems, at least in our case, that seems to be what has worked. But it requires a lot of effort on your side. The other thing I want to say is that, you're looking at grassroots sports, right? Which means that you need to spread out. You're talking from 60 lakhs to 100 million. It has to be spread out at grassroots level. But the fundamental problem in grassroots, which is where we operate, in the Lila Punawala Foundation, where we sponsor students who will get over 60% marks consistently at low income levels in 11 schools, which are primarily low income private schools and rural schools. The fundamental problem there is infrastructure, sports infrastructure. If you go out and sell sports, it's not going to work. The first thing you have to do is to sell infrastructure. That means that's where you need the basic funding. And the other thing is they may or may not have the ground. So why do we, when we think of sports, we think of outdoor sports and we think of competitive sports. We don't think of indoor sports, which are much easier to handle and which are actually also activity for the children. Things like self-defense can also be added into indoor sports. Things that are critical to children. life, you know. So these are the areas that will help you open up, and there you can certainly position it against education. I mean, as a consonant to education,
Actually,
and it
that's
becomes a part.
Great idea.
Yeah, and it becomes a part of the curriculum. I remember, at least in my school, we always had a PT session, you know, 2 or 3 times a week, and then after school hours we play hockey and basketball and stuff like that. So you must look at sports in terms of the definition of sports. Why does it only have to be outdoor sports? Because that's an expensive proposition. You know, some schools do. Some schools like we work with do have the grounds, but they're not made up. Which means so you need infrastructure support, and if there are no grounds, then look at indoor sports.
I want to just ask, just understand, sorry. In my mind, what you've done very nicely, at least for me, our focus has been a service program. Our focus has been a service wrapper on whatever you have. You're kind of reminding us that there could be I'm just calling it product, a hard product, setting up an infrastructure, DVTT table or whatever,
Yeah.
which is not a service, it is a product. I could give shoes to the kids.
Yeah.
There could be different ways to. Is there a service product context as well in this whole conversation?
Definitely, if you want to go grassroots level, definitely. You know, your elite school, I mean your schools in cities are limited. And the number of children are also limited. If you want the large numbers, then they come from smaller towns, villages, panchayat level places. And panchayats have the funds. So in terms of creating a rapport with panchayats is another way to go. Working with the sports ministry is another way to go. I mean, I work with another NGO, I was telling Pravinda, where in this particular NGO it's called Tata Incubated, incidentally it's called Transforming Rural India. So the model is very different in the sense that they hire people largely from Pratham, where they have skills at various levels, you know, and they have worked in rural areas. And they seed them into government organizations. The only service they provide is to get them into government from chief secretary level all the way down to the block level. And they work, design programs ground up, and convince the because the belief is that if you access the largest single funder in the country is the government. If you can access those funds, you've accessed it all. So another solution is to actually look at that model through the sports ministry at the central level and at the state levels. They're a great source of helping you spread out without having to rely only on CSR funds.
Maybe at some point we'll ask President to talk about what they do on SSA.
Yes,
Good.
Yeah, I completely agree on how you can broad base it, and just to share that that's what we've been trying to do at the trust when we say grassroots. 2 things. I think one, when you talked about indoor spaces, because our work is primarily in the rural tribal areas where infra is non-existent. But they'll have grounds, thankfully, especially except for probably hilly regions, you still have grounds, right? And how do we leverage these open grounds, or which is bare minimum what is available in a school setup? And hence the thought is to look at, as we say, sports. When we talk about sports, it's again, as we talk about structured training, we need infra, we need equipment, then we need proper training, and then the pathway. But if you come one step below, which is the in-school programs where the physical literacy is, and that's the how we can promote physical literacy. I mean, I think experts they have done well in reaching out to schools in the middle tiers and the top tier cities where they at least that understanding or they're trying to develop this ecosystem stronger within school for proper sports. But when we want to get into the lower tiered cities or the villages, that's where the only way, I mean, we've tried all of those waves, and the only way we thought we could scale was addressing or working with the teachers in the government schools and selling the idea of physical literacy as an integrated academic program. So very rightly, we always talk about numerical literacy, language literacy, but where's the physical literacy part of it? And these has to be the 3 pillars on which we say that a child is developing holistically. When we just say only these 2, we are completely ignoring the holistic development per se, which is happening through physical literacy. So, getting or reaching out to these schools, it's tough. It's tough working with government schools. I know we've heard so many stories of, and we have different geographies where the responses have been very different. Where how does a primary teacher, who's typically in government schools where we have less the student to child ratio is very high. I mean, how would they take to doing physical activity when they have not ever done it in their, at least majority of the women, as we say in those schools, they have not done, have not and unfortunately gone through a sports surface. Very few of them have gone through that. So how will they take to now learning how to integrate physical activity through education? So we try to look at a hook. I mean, so what do if I say that, oh, I'm coming here to teach you how to train children in sports, the first thing you do, I don't know how to do that, and I don't. So that we try to hook, saying, okay, let me help you do activities which will help children learn academic concepts through physical activity. And there are ways. So they're doing physical activity, but we're also putting, they are also learning some academic concepts, and that hook worked. At least so Uttarakhand, we're doing it in around 300 schools, where you will always have those who are doing good, those who do not want to do anything, but where we have 50-60% of the teachers saying, this activity sounds good, children enjoy, which otherwise they would not enjoy sitting down and learning something. They're engaged in physical activity. It can be done with minimal equipment, with least space, and you are developing the foundation for sports, right? So you're developing those basic fundamental movements through fun activities and teaching them academic concepts, which is a hook for your teacher to start at least talking about sports. So that if we look at that as a foundation layer in schools, and that's where, we are trying to work with the government. We are trying to work with the education department, saying that, okay, see, this is what we have done. You have teacher learnings, right? They have teacher training centers in all of these places. A huge investment going from the government. I think many organizations out there trying to hold these trainings for teachers, train them, right? Can physical literacy be integrated into it so that they also start learning this and they also start delivering this? So working with the government, yes, we can take it to scale, as you rightly mentioned. Yes, that's the option. That's the one entity which is there everywhere. So we have to learn to work with
this gives you an idea. If you look at preschool, how are they teaching the children?
Yeah. Through activities. Yeah.
That is the model to follow.
Exactly. So we
just look at that pattern everywhere, whether it's here or anywhere in the world. Preschool children's nursery and kindergarten preschool activities all around
activities. Experiential learning, as we talk about.
Everybody's learning through that. But we lose that the moment they get into the first standard.
Absolutely.
That's where the problem lies.
Yeah.
So just to thanks for that. Just to connect Ashish and Deepak's input. So the sports pillar. Now Tata Group is known sports pillar. A lot of focus in. And the idea that success, if you define it well, whichever manner we do, these could be not sufficient necessary conditions for it. But how easy do you find getting resources for sport within Tata Trust? What is the challenge?
The same challenges as we are talking across the table. It depends upon the enabler, as we say, the person at the top. If that person is passionate about sports, you get the funding. If that is not, then you don't get the funding. And then you have those ups and downs. One thing that has taught me is because of that experience, and it's not consistent. So you are not going to get consistent funding for programs to run over the years, and we need consistent, as you rightly said, absolutely. We're giving them a taste of it.
CSR funding is not the way if you want to reach this level.
So CSR is one
way. Let him finish, and I've got a lot to go.
Please.
I'd actually noted down expanding the definition pretty early on in my thoughts. I think has already been touched upon, and I think there are two things. One is to break that barrier of what are sports champions or not sports champions. You have to continue integrating your work and generally sport into other aspects, whether it's play-based learning, whether it's activity within the classroom. How do you get that? How do you get that across? And once you're able to do that, I think then it all becomes about non-sporting outcomes. That way, you are achieving critical outcomes out of one intervention, and that's something we keep talking about at SSN in general, is that what are the 3-4 major critical outcomes out of sport. So it's not, then the conversation isn't about sport, it's about education, it's about empowerment, it's about other outcomes, health especially, and that way you're able to access a whole different level of people who may not have seen what sport or generally are even not champions of sport, but are, if they're getting the outcomes they're looking for in terms of, let's say, better education, better health, then you're able to sell that intervention as a equal thing on par with other things. But, and I think how this can be done is perhaps creating things like model schools, so selling the school as a product. So it's not about sports villages intervention in the playtime, in the sports, in the PE session or things like that, but like an activity powered school where you're able to show how integrating activity into daily aspects can lead to XYZ outcomes. Therefore, it's not then expanding the definition of sport to generally daily activity. So it's about infrastructure. If you're able to convince like 5 schools to be able to integrate certain aspects into infrastructure which enable activity within students, you're then showing that there is an outcome associated with, through that, there is a direct, I'm sure then if you compare from a baseline to an end line, there is a direct causation or at very least a correlation to what is the, post the changes, what are the effects post the changes, sell that as a product, as a model school.
Yeah.
And I think that's to other schools or to other funders, is that if you can do something like that, then that becomes an idea of sports not being limited to one session once per week, twice per week, thrice per week. It becomes a part of everyday life. So the conversation then becomes, if it's a part of everyday life and it's getting you many, many more outcomes, I think the idea of a model school in and of itself can open the conversation a lot more.
Yeah, just to add, sorry, on the model school bit, I mean, so when we look at these, what we try to do, I mean, that, we work with these primary teachers in Uttarakhand schools, very small schools, 2 rooms, small playground. So hence the concept of what can we do with minimal space and minimal equipment. Okay? We did that, and now we identified certain group of teachers who we are enthusiastic. They are doing it on their own, and now we try to look at how we can add value, more value. So as a reward, we said, okay, we can help you set up these active playgrounds, right? Which is not necessarily a huge infra, but having certain things which can be reusable materials can be used to set up active playgrounds where they can balance, they have tires, they have things to hang on, which can be done in smaller space. And then that's what we sell as a model school. And we said, yeah, if in every block that we work on, we try to identify 5-10 schools where we say we'll help you set this up. We will also help try and build that ecosystem of getting people trained in that region to set up that infra. So building on to local capacity and resources and opening that as an avenue for income generation, not trying to every time, once you set these model schools, how can we scale it as we said it? For scaling, it has to be localized. You cannot scale it by getting experts from outside to get there. So how we do that, and
it also means an ecosystem.
The
ecosystem is like sports medicine, sports training, which then filters down to physical training. It can be expanded into any number of aspects. That ecosystem also has to develop around this concept of sports activity in schools or anywhere else, colleges or wherever. That ecosystem is missing. Like in tourism, if Kerala hadn't done what it had done, it would never have been the success story it was. That ecosystem is also missing at the moment.
I guess 2 points and one suggestion. Love this model school idea, and if I connect with the point before, you could actually create almost a rating of schools in a way and start to almost publish that. If you could create some sort of a standard, do that. It works amazing. People love being called in a particular tier, particular category, and you could be the enabler as a neutral body coming up and sharing this. It is not just your related, and you could rate even tier 2 towns and places and all that. One point at least, which is a key one for me, is if you're really going for scale, I can't see how without CSR funding you're going to get to scale, because the moment you go into tier 3 cities, there will be no money available, I think, other than getting CSR funding in some sort to support that. Isn't that a key point? You are saying do it without CSR funding.
No, I'm saying what CSR funding will do is only allow you that much scale. If you want to scale up to 100 million, which means that you are wanting it as a facility for all children, just for the winners, not for just for the champions that you're creating, then you have to access government funds, because that's the only one that will percolate down to the block and village level.
And
Probably
so
collaboration is what.
probably
CSR
collaboration. So if that was
Without
my-
that you can't scale.
So there, one other angle which came from you, Ruda, again, was on the empowering women. Yeah, if you can bring that stronger, especially like connecting that to classes for women, judo class, self-defense, getting them to be more independent. And again, if you could connect that to, if you do that, women become more, that theme will work amazingly. You are adding a whole different CSR bucket that will come into play the moment you do that. And the last one is, if I'm connecting to Thermax's experience, the one big exception that we have to supporting schools is to support local communities where we have factories. And most of our plants are in tier 2, tier 2 cities. Jagadia, I know you talked about Moga. I know Pepsi has a big plant in Moga.
Yeah.
And they have Nestle has a plant in Moga. We actually have a plant, the way we have a build and operate plant in there, we have it in Moga. And there, those places have got direct funding available to support local communities. If you could go and make that connect going, saying for people that are working at the plant or otherwise, you're getting those local communities engaged, you can access a whole different level of CSR.
That means
funding.
those plants have their own funds available.
It is all decided at the corporate level,
Yeah.
but a
But they
good
influence
percentage of ours, because many of our labor comes from there.
Yeah.
So we have got unions, we've got all, and we need to keep those local communities engaged. And those communities come back and say, आपने हमारे लिए कितना spend किया? So there also, our money, for example, in Shirwal we spend money. Where is that money going? Getting women to be at a place where they can work at our plants, giving them basic training, basic infrastructure for our plants or whoever. But the Women Connect is very strong, and empowering women is where we spend money in communities, doing things, putting solar panels, getting electricity, those kinds of projects. But there, if somebody came and says this becomes a big part of local engagement, and especially then if you can connect it to, like, here's a football tournament that happens that ultimately came through all the work that got done, those kinds of things could be very, very
That's
important.
great. And in terms of where plants are, much easier to get community engagement level funding from the corporates. You'll always have money to spend to build your goodwill around the communities there. A question, so most government schools, I'm not talking primary schools, but bigger schools, do they have a coach, sports coach and a PE teacher kind of stuff? It used to be there, I have studied in a government school, so there used to be a couple of guys, they didn't use anything.
Use ASR data seems to be that 66% of schools have some infra or some sports equipment. Some could mean anything, but has some. I think less than 10% have a full-time PE teacher.
Oh, government schools.
Yeah, positions are not filled.
Yeah.
It's the last
So
position.
is that an area, I'm just wondering, because
It's a big area. PT teachers
Yeah.
are pretty. You know, I was listening to a podcast in which this gentleman said that in rural areas there's one teacher to 60 students.
Yeah, true.
Now, is she going to teach or is she going to do sports? You know, and is she equipped to even do sports? You know, as we understand sports. So infrastructure also means teacher. I mean, PT trainers. You need PT trainers. You should be starting a school.
Yeah.
You know, maybe with Wipro. Wipro is heavily into teacher training. Maybe they could start something in the sports field.
So on that, what I'm thinking is, can you create some? So these teachers, one is probably they don't have any recognition. I mean, what is their motivation? Maybe there is not enough activity in the school, and as they don't get. So could there be a program basically focused on them, with outcomes which actually help the students in the school and the things we want, but it kind of energizes them and involves them, and possibly there could be corporate sponsorships for those. Possibly.
You mean corporate and CSR or corporate?
No, I think CSR will top. CSR can be, and issue with CSR is it can be a little bit, as I said, discretionary, and if it's not in the pillar. So that can be there, but some brands some brands were interested in creating a culture of sports. The brands which come to mind would be Nike, Adidas, kind of brands. I don't know why it's not big here in India, but in US and all it's like really huge, right?
Basketball.
I don't know why not, but those kind of brands who benefit from a culture of sports, right? Then they would just spend on making sports popular, making activity popular, because at the end of it they will benefit. Other brands you have to find a reason to connect to sports. So that from a corporate sponsorship standpoint, PT coaches or something which is a smaller number and community than going to all schools and students as a system, maybe there is some idea there. So that could be right.
Just to add, Deepak, I mean, they tried this. So physical educators, to really have a program for them, for their own development, because you have teacher trainings happening for all academic subjects except for physical. Yeah, they don't know what to do. So ELMS Foundation, they work with Odisha at scale for conducting these programs for teachers, not just in Odisha. I think Gujarat, it's going on for a long time, and the Scale Mahakumbh and all of these products or these tournaments are coming from the teachers. So there's a lot of work happening with the physical educators there. They are trying to now, the modus operandi is trying to get to the government and get the government, because physical teachers will listen to the government, they will not listen to you, right? So, unless the directive comes, they will not even attend your training. So that's the starting point. So get the buy-in from the government there. Thankfully, we had Odisha government who was pro sports, so they had that vision and they enabled it and said mandatory haan jana hai. So at least they came. Once they came, then
We took a tag,
then
big supporter of
yeah.
sports.
Yeah. So then we tried building and then having some kind of a motivation is absolutely essential. Not I think for physical trainers, but even for the grassroots coaches. How do we? Because when we talk about community programs or grassroots sports, I mean, everybody needs motivation, right? You're doing the same thing over and over. But when we say that the grassroots is a funnel for competition and for identifying people at the top, how often do we, when a player at a national level wins a medal, how often do we go and facilitate a grassroots coach who trained that particular player? So having that connect, are we doing it? So in Mizoram badminton program that we did, we did that. So we got when we got junior badminton champion from our grassroots program, and he won. We identified the grassroots trainers, so we facilitated them to say that, hey, you are the ones who's seeding that thought, right, or seeding that champion somewhere. So I think that recognition is absolutely essential to really say, okay, I am not the one who has taken that to the top, but at least I have been an important factor, and I get, if nothing else, just get a handful of people together and recognize that, and that's good enough, even if you're not able to give them monetary awards or whatever.
Recognition is big.
Completely agree with you.
I also think that the conversation also ought to be about non-PE teachers, and that there is a lack of them. How do you train other subject teachers to integrate sport and physical activity and play-based learning into their curriculum, into their work? So you're not then perhaps fighting against the paucity of PE teachers.
But I want to just go back there. Is the solution PE teachers? Is it a staffing solution? Because we're kind of sidestepping that and saying I'll get a math teacher to teach play. But there's the issue of time, issue of attention, issue of capability and all this stuff. Issue of credibility also. Kids are not listening to you as a math teacher.
Yeah.
Right? So is the solution or possible solution a staffing solution, building also? Is it a rewarding and acknowledging, or also a staffing? That
So
hey, we have
both, right? What I heard from you was there are only 10% schools who
Yeah.
are good. But staffing is not, let's say, a bigger problem. So let's not go there first. First go where there is staff.
And then
Are we energizing or
Yeah,
enabling
and
and
enough
therefore there will be
there?
demand for other people.
Yeah.
Look, we have to start where
Somewhere.
at least barriers are there and
But
opportunities.
is there a sports training curriculum anywhere in the country?
There is.
Where?
NSTC, which is a vocational education, there is a larger body around. They have in-service programs, and we have also created such curriculums.
I think the new
Certification programs.
Yeah, the new education policy also now
Also
they
has
are
a-
they are trying to do it at. There's a committee who's
Promote
defining
it.
it at.
And also BPED MPED courses, like you have B.Ed courses, there are BPED MPED courses.
You know, we faced the same problem about 30 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago with people who were able to work in rural areas. You know, except for the Gujarat Indian Institute of Agricultural Training, there was nobody else where we could get this body of people. You know, it takes time, but once it's there, then it just. I mean, now NGOs are only are flooded with people from there. Unless you have that, you've got to initiate it now. Somehow it has to be initiated.
So I have a
That's what I was saying. Ecosystem has to be built around it.
So I have a point on that.
Oh.
Leena, I made this point here. So Leena, the idea that discussing resources and scaling sport and things like that, from your lens, I mean, in CSR being a judge, how do you view sport and the experiments with that?
Yeah.
You've spoken at length on working together and things like
Sure.
that.
So we do recognize that sports is an important part of life, but not necessarily have we called it out as a separate portfolio or a separate vertical, like we have done in the case of skilling. But I feel irrespective of that, there is ample scope and opportunities for us to integrate sports or a physical activity in say other areas. Like let's not look at sports as an outcome or an end in itself. Instead, trying to look for areas where we can pretty much leverage this and tie it up with other outcomes, other development outcomes. I would specifically call it out as a development outcome. Some countries have done it, like abroad, I guess Australia, Canada, they've progressed much in terms of this. But in our case, it is work in progress. Like there are some states like Odisha, they have specifically invested a lot in sports. Haryana is again, an
Do you
example.
mean social emotional skills and things like that? Development
Yes.
outcomes?
So we've partnered with Magic Bus for a long time, and because they do this using sports to integrate life skill education in an education setting, like
Right.
preferably like in school.
Yeah.
So we've done that for a large part, and we realize that it's important because creating an excellent sports person is one goal, but then the other part of it is again making children participate in an activity, like how to make them stronger, better in terms of even academically. We realize that it's important to make them active so that they are able to perform better in school. Maybe behavior also is an aspect that can be tapped into, and maybe if a child has a behavioral issue, so a lot of energy, if channelized into an activity like this, can be managed. So things like this, improving attendance, a child may not sit in the class if he or she has to just listen to a teacher taking the class.
Attention, having worked in some
Yeah.
of the thermal schools,
Yeah.
the ones that EMC ones, attention is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
He spoke about
Yes.
it when we were outside.
Remembering to do your homework and bring it to school, all of that,
Absolutely. So it is
It
solvable.
empowers all that,
Yes,
Most
I mean
of
if
that.
we use sports
Yeah.
to tap into these things, and also health may be a potential area
Absolutely.
to look at. We've not done it
Surely
so
we
far
will.
in health, but yes, in education it continues to remain a focus area for us, and we feel that it is important to integrate sports into an education setting per se, because and not everything can be done by us, because government, like a buy-in, like ma'am said, it has to be an important element in our partnership. Like they should be taking an ownership, because ours is again, we can just take a 3 to 5 years view of how we can support an organization. But then, because we are into grants management, we don't do things directly. So we fund NGOs who are experts, and we implement projects through them. But if the buy-in from government is there, very clearly, it is scalable.
But how do you
No, it
monitor,
can't be.
how do you monitor the outcomes which are all really qualitative?
So we did a little bit of brainstorming. So schools typically do these assessments as part of their regular, what
level schools do you work with?
So we work with municipal schools, we work with private schools as well, that
Low
are
income.
trust run, low income private schools. And largely it is PMC schools. So we are present pretty much in about 150 schools with some intervention or the other. So
Only in
mental
Pune?
health is one.
Only in Pune?
Only in Pune. So
Okay.
education for us is just focused in Pune.
Okay.
And that too within the PMC limits, schools that fall within the limits. There also we've said we'll support PMC schools.
Usually similar for Thermax.
Yeah.
Large part.
Yeah.
The exception is wherever our factories are.
Plants.
Yeah, so that's the big one.
The government has come up a few times. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, also we feel not just, we are located here, that's a significant driver, I would say, to have taken a decision like this. But then apart from that, there's so much to be done, even within the city. So we felt we should first focus where we are and then kind of, scale up. We look outside. So that's...
Sure. Since the government got spoken a few times and they are not in the room, I will request Mridul from Sports and Society Accelerator, because they have knocked on government door, NITI Aayog and so on. Just tell us about, as a government person here.
Far from it.
Other side of the door.
No, I think there is definitely an increasing amount of reception to it.
Yeah.
You see the NEP, even within Fit India, there is a lot of interest to be like, how can we support sport for social outcomes? And you talked about the model of England. What they've done is that there is a whole body which is just looking at elite sport, and there is one which is just looking at participation in Sport England. So they will directly fund these programs, and it's about, which comes through building an ecosystem. There is a massive sport for development coalition there, which is I think 2,000 organizations. But generally there was also a government mandate post London 2012 is that how can we increase participation in sport. So I think when we talk about India's performance in 2024, Paralympics great, Olympics not so much. I think we already almost equaled the medal tally of the Olympics in 2-3 days. I think the conversation and how we can contribute to that is, even if you look at schools and all of those things, the solution is not getting more athletes. The solution is getting more people to play and getting more children to play. And therefore, then, of course, I think the conversation on medals still ought to be there. Maybe not have the same mind share, but it's something that needs to be talked about, that this is also an outcome. So I think when we talk about sport as an entity, as an intervention, of course, elite athletics, elite sport is still a very important part of the conversation. But how do you talk about that? I think that's where it really comes into that. I think there is, of course, someone like an Odisha, there is an interest in sport. There is also very much an interest in investing in infrastructure. But there is also an increasing interest in how do you use sport for social outcomes. Haryana, if you talk about it, they have in their policy sport for development as a separate section, and we look at sport being a key part of culture as such, because that's again government mandate, but that's also developed into social outcomes using sport for that. Similar with other states, there are a few more of them who are continuously looking at sport for social outcomes. I think what we did also was more recently, 2 months ago, if I'm not wrong, an analysis of these policies across, I think, 19-20 states, and quite a few of them are now slightly veering towards that idea of using sport for different things.
Does the sports ministry get a good budget every year?
That's the thing. I think Fit India has zero budget,
No.
technically. Fit India doesn't have.
Answer is no.
Khelo India has a lot more.
Other side of the ministry.
Khelo India has a lot more. So it's
That's competitive.
Khelo India has a lot more. Fit India doesn't. as far as I.
So development versus.
That's a very
Yeah.
different
That's
game.
very
Yeah, that's a very different thing altogether. But how can we get that? I think that's a big
Thanks.
question.
I had one last point before I close today, which was for you. We spoke about working with government and also the government budgets are there, and perhaps they're not being spent. The pay teacher
Right.
staffing is largely
Yeah.
budgets which are unspent, lying with the government at this point. So influencing policy to make it come down is one, but that requires investment. So I think the idea of, we have seen CSR is limited, and some of you mentioned that you can't scale with that. Just want to ask you, is philanthropy a angle there? Philanthropical non-CSR corporate capital, how do you do that? You have philanthropists on board.
No, I can't answer that question. Yeah, but I think
Is it a,
it's a possibility. I mean, for example, in some of our funding, we find that what is a very low amount of individual, I mean, for example, out of the blue in America, we got a sponsor who sponsored a family called Gopes who sponsored 145 girls in India for undergraduate engineering training course. So there are pockets like that, but finding those pockets are not easy, not at all
And getting
easy.
those to come to
Sports. Yeah,
is,
that's the
very
idea.
did you find a donor like you?
Even perhaps not, because if you see everything else that is asking, I think my one takeaway from this is your messaging,
Has to be
because
good.
you're working with a set of people and it took her 5 minutes to describe all the advantages that come. But you will get 30 seconds to put that out, and somebody won't have the patience to understand everything that she spoke about, attention, getting the hyper bit out, everything. You will have to figure out what's your one book that gets everyone
It's a marketing problem.
to
Immediately.
get through, and that's your, you've got two amazing marketing people, so that has to be, and in some senses, that has to be your core as well. What are you really, really aiming to do with this? That, I think that's one.
What is the
that's
passion
easy-
that drives you to do
You
this?
guys
Is the
to
critical
do
point.
this. Yeah,
What
otherwise.
is it that you want
For us, one more reason is probably Sanjeev Bajaj himself was a player, a basketball player. So, yeah, I mean,
Sanjeev is a basketball.
yes, and a very good one. So therefore, convincing is not an issue on sports, especially. So there is a buy-in.
That's exactly what he's saying. The buy-in is there.
So leadership, yeah, I mean, it all boils down.
So great. I think we're out of time, but
Yeah.
just want to thank everyone for being so generous with your time.
One last thing.
Sure.
So through all of this, first, big kudos to
Thank you.
for getting this, yeah, even where you have reached, and take confidence that for a country which is getting richer and richer, a good part of what you need done will happen as we get richer. There'll be more budgets available, there'll be more things available. Everything should get progressively, slightly easier.
Amen.
Yeah, and you are starting in a place where you have scale which very few others do. So take a load of confidence from that as you look at everything else. You guys will do amazing things.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody
Very
for,
well.
for a generous
This is
time.
really uphill. For them, it's really uphill. Education is easier to sell than sports.
But as you get, it's happening everywhere.
And
No,
versus
it's
15 years
why is
ago, the
Nika
environment
getting the
today is-
valuation it is doing? Because it's not just for today.
Yeah.
The country which is 20 years from now will have a lot of discretionary spending to make, will have a lot of other things to do. Yeah, and similarly, so this is going to be part of that thing which will just get pulled up. We will have more and more kids staying in school, doing things. Governments will have a bit more budgets available. CSRs will do better and better. We are seeing that already. As our profits are going up, we've got more and more CSR funding available. We can do more interesting things. So that
But the
phenomenon will
irony
continue.
is that you are supporting government schemes when government should be supporting its own schemes.
That is the sad part. That is
That's
Pune,
the
no?
irony.
Like,
That's a larger-
yeah, to clean up Pune is they're coming and saying, "Aap hi paisa hai. What the hell are you doing with your money?"
Yeah, what are you doing with your
Your
money?
money. That's going for all the billboards they have to put up.
But if you get Olympics, I mean, if India gets Olympics,
That can be a dinner discussion.
They know our lives.
If we host the Olympics in India,
if it was the Olympic, it will be a huge boost, for sure.
आप सबके रूम में
82 Asia, it was a huge boost.
But thank you once again, and we'll circulate the note later.
Thank you.
I know you have to.